Welcome everybody to the Hopkins Group and NDIS Property Australia's webinar on NDIS property and the opportunity that exists in the marketplace at the moment. My name is Michael Williams. I'm the Managing Director and one of the Senior Financial Planners of the Hopkins Group. And I'm going to walk you through initially what we see as our role within the organisation to present to you the opportunity of NDIS property, and then hand over to Min Lee and Rob Maxwell, who work for NDIS Property Australia, to run through in more detail how it works, what the opportunity is, and how we can present it to you in the marketplace. So there's a couple of options. Whilst we're doing a presentation tonight, we do have both a question and answer function and a chat function. So up the top is both a Q&A and a chat function. If you want to lodge a question as we go along and it's easily answerable, I'll answer it into the chat function. Otherwise, we'll save it up and we'll ask Min and Rob when we get the opportunity, and they'll come back and answer it in more detail. Ideally, what we want to organise after this is an opportunity to meet with you individually, have a look at your circumstances and see whether this strategy applies to you or another strategy. So we'll be available to answer all your questions at an appropriate time. So a little bit more about the Hopkins Group. John, my business partner, established a business back in 1980, and we established it to give advice about residential investment property as an asset class. Over time, our business has morphed into a full financial services firm, offering advice to individuals about property investment, property sales, property management, mortgage and finance, tax and accounting, property development, and our core goal, which is financial planning. Having a look at where you are today and where you want to be in 5 years' time and 10 years' time, and then being able to use those other specialists within the organisation to help you achieve those goals. Our property advisory side of our business has expanded over time as opportunities have presented themselves, or as we've seen an opportunity to better enhance our clients' strategic portfolios. So whether that be small-scale property development, dual locks, townhouse sites, granny flats out the back, whether that be rooming house investment, purpose-built rooming houses to provide a greater rental income, or over the last couple of years, delving into what is NDIS or special disability accommodation, and the opportunity that affords our client base to invest in both social housing and a traditional property investment, but with a higher level of rental income potentially. So I'm going to hand over to Min Lee and Rob Maxwell of NDIS Property Australia to run through in more detail the opportunity and how we see it in the marketplace. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's Rob. As Michael mentioned, I'm here with Min from NDIS Property Australia. We'll turn off our pictures so we can all focus on the PowerPoint presentation. We're keeping this reasonably informal. We're going to go through a number of slides, but we'll also talk to the slides and throughout various aspects of the opportunity going forward for you. If you've got any questions, as Michael mentioned, you can put it into the chat box and we'll endeavour to get to those during the presentation. All right, now NDIS Property Australia was set up by Min a couple of years ago. Both of us have got a background in property, financial services, capital raising. We had been doing normal property investment, but saw the opportunity in this sector. It's very specialised. It takes a lot of understanding because it's very complicated to understand and advise in this sector. But hopefully after tonight, you'll see that there is enormous opportunity in this sector, and particularly throughout Melbourne and Victoria currently, which we'll touch on. Give you an idea, SDA, dwelling types. SDA is specialist disability accommodation based on the NDIS. Now, the rules around specialist disability accommodation were set up by the federal government in 2016 and came into effect in 2019. So it's still reasonably early days. The sector as a whole, only been 2 or 3 years where these properties have been built Australia-wide. Queensland and New South Wales have been a little bit more advanced than Victoria in doing these builds, whether they're apartments or houses or villas. But that's why we see going forward, there's an enormous opportunity in Melbourne and Victoria because there's very little that has been done in this sector up to date. Different types of properties in the sector. Traditionally, back 40 years, the government has actually run the whole sector and provided the housing. So they've built the homes, which are called group homes. These might now be 30 or 40 years old. They've put 4 or 5 up to 8 people that are in the NDIS and have some form of disability into these homes. Come 2016, the government decided going forward that they didn't want to actually be the investor in these properties. They wanted to incentivise the private sector to put the money in to build new properties to expand the sector going forward for participants. Over the last 5 years, predominantly apartments is where the majority of these have been built. And that is mainly from big fund managers and financial groups. You've got Macquarie Group and a number of big superannuation funds and property groups that have been building apartments Australia-wide, mainly 1 bedroom for high physical participants. And we'll talk about the different type of participants going forward shortly. You also have villas, duplexes and townhouses being built, quite often in groups of 10 or 11 in a particular site. And again, the majority of that has been big fund managers and companies that have been doing that over the last few years. Now we're moving more into the sector where we're building house and land. So whether it be a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom house, this is the area where more investors such as yourselves are becoming involved through companies like us that are helping you put together finding the land and also the particular builder and bringing the opportunities and the understanding of what it all means to you. Now, when we look at building in this sector for people with disability, the first thing we need to decide, and they pretty much tell us where do they want to live, and that dictates what we build and where we build. It's very different to normal investment property in that there is very specific requirements for whether a home that is approved by the NDIS and their subsidiary NDIA, which is the association that does all the approvals for the sector. You have to look at a number of different requirements for where the home is built. They need to be near family and friends. Ideally within a few kilometres. They don't want to be a long way from their family and friends because that's their support network. They also have to have close proximity to shopping centres, to public transport, to entertainment, cafes, restaurants. They need to be close to hospitals, and they also want to be close to the amenities that they're going to need to help with their particular disability, whether it's swimming pools, gyms, parks, etc. So there are requirements in that you want to be within reason, within a couple of kilometres of shopping centres and public transport. Therefore, we have to look at building in new land estates that either have these facilities in place or will likely have them in the next 12 months before the properties are built. You also need to make sure that the government's provided access for people in a wheelchair, whether it's through transport or again through those shopping centres and public transport systems. Give you a bit of an idea of how this works. When you're talking buying a normal investment property, you're just dealing with the particular real estate agent that handles the property for you. You're the landlord. They get paid direct by the tenants. With SDA housing, it's a little bit more complicated in that we're involving more parties. First of all, of course, you've got the NDIS, which is the government department that gives the approval for these people to live in these properties, and they also obviously pay the majority of the rental for those people over the 20-year period. You've got the NDIS participant itself. Now, they obviously have to have funding in place in order to access this particular housing. Then you have the supported independent living providers. They're the carer organisations. Think of them as the employment agencies that provide the carers, whether they're nurses or they don't necessarily have to be qualified nurses. They have to be carers that go into the homes on a full-time basis and support the particular participants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So a number of those have to go in and out of the houses. Then the SDA provider is the actual real estate agency group that has a real estate licence. But on top of the real estate license, they have to have a very specific license from the NDIS in order to operate in this sector. So it's highly regulated, a lot of compliance to make sure that they're following the rules that the NDIS and NDIA put in place. And to give a bit of a time frame as to how this all works, obviously the participants need to identify the need that they have for new housing. Now, this process can take 12 to 18 months from start to finish before they actually get approval and funding in order to be able to go into an SDA approved house. They sit down with a plan manager, which is a specific person who has the skills to put together a plan for the particular participant that then gets lodged with the NDIA. So it's basically a plan putting in place as to why the particular participant should have funding from the government in order to live in one of these homes. That then goes to the NDIA, who assess it and approve a particular level of funding for the particular participant, depending on the category of disability that we'll touch on shortly. After they've got the funding, they're then obviously going to look at searching for housing, and that's where they come to groups like us, and we liaise with them in consultation with them, the SIL providers and also the SDA providers, to work out where the housing is needed, in what particular area, and what might be appropriate for them. We look at involving the investors at this stage. So we'll come to the investors and we'll say there's a particular demand in a particular area of Melbourne or country of Victoria for these properties. We know that there are participants looking to move into these properties going forward, and we've identified a number that might be suitable. Therefore, we need to build the property in that area. Once that's done, the properties are built, the tenancy agreements are put in place with the SDA provider and the SIL. The tenant moves in, then you've got a normal investment property situation for the next 20 years, where the NDIA then makes payments to the SDA provider. The way you get the rental income is broken up into 3 specific payments. The majority of the money, around 75% of the funds, are paid by the NDIA to the landlord via the rental agent. And these amounts, which we'll touch on shortly in slides, are fixed depending on the particular category that the participant is in, the type of property that they're renting, and also there is a locational factor which involves the area that the property is in. You also get 25% of the particular participants' pension payments on a monthly basis that come automatically out of their Centrelink payments. So it's all automated and direct debited. And then on top of that, you also get a Commonwealth Government rental assistance allowance payment as well. The pension payment and the rental allowance payment is roughly $10,000 a year. And then the NDIA payment per person, we'll touch on in the slides with Min shortly. And then the participants pay the SDA provider the rent component. All right, Min, do you want to jump in and start talking about a few of the stats?
Thanks, Rob. At the moment, in December 21, we have a number of about 502,000 participants in the NDIS. Now, in Australia, we're looking at about 4.5 million people who are disabled in some form or capacity. So of Australia's population of 26, 27 million people, 4.5 million are disabled. Now, of the 4.5 million people, there's 500,000 plus in the NDIS. And every day there's more and more coming into the system. And that's why in the press the last few months or last year or so, there's been a lot of commentary about the sustainability of the NDIS. And the whole goal was 2 or 3 years ago, 22 billion per year was funding towards the NDIS by the government. Last year, about 8-9 months ago, it turned up to be 30 billion a year. And now, as of the last week's federal budget, we're looking at 40 billion per year for the next 4 years. $157 billion for 4 years is about $40 billion. So if anything at all, it's actually going up more and more every single year or 2 years. So Medicare is at 50 billion, and we're looking at a system, an insurance scheme called the NDIS, which will far exceed the Medicare system in the next 2 or 3 years' time. So at the moment, we're looking at 31st of December, forecast of 30,000 people there. At the moment, there's 17,000 people who are already funded by the NDIA for SDA already, but only 2,500 dwellings are actually SDA enrolled as in new buildings. And there are probably 7,500 all up, 7,500 total dwellings, of which 2,500 are brand new the last 3 years. Next slide, Rob. This is a breakdown of all the SDA places across the jurisdictions of Australia with regards to the SDA. So as you can see here, there's a very heavy weighting towards the HPS, and HPS is basically the high needs wheelchair, electronic wheelchair participants. Okay, the normal wheelchair people would be in the fully accessible category there, and improvability and robust are improvability actually 70% of the market pretty much, and robust is 10%. So we'll go through the definitions of what those are later on. But as you can see here with Victoria, there's about 400 dwellings all up in Victoria. And of those 400 dwellings, they cover 560 places. So I think if you're looking at 560 places across 400 dwellings, you're looking at about majority being one bedroom units, one single occupant per dwelling. So the 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom units. So very heavy weighting towards the apartment sector there for the Victorian market. Next slide, please, Rob. Here we are, just verifying again across Australia. We're seeing 80%, 80 or 90% of the whole market is just the high physical support, wheelchair accessible dwellings, and again mostly apartments. Definitely a huge demand there from an improvability and robust point of view. SDA pipeline data. This is the construction of pipeline of construction dwellings in the coming year or so. So we're looking at in Victoria specifically 508 dwellings coming out in the next year or so, being apartments and blocks of land or under construction, houses under construction. And again, a very heavy weighting towards the HPS, high physical support category. The neglected areas are robust and improvability. And what you might see there to the right-hand side of the column there is hybrid. Rob, can you explain what hybrid is to our listeners?
Yeah, hybrid is the category of build that pretty much covers all 4 categories. So it's an extensive build that covers the requirements for robust, high physical improvability and fully accessible. So therefore you have choice as to the particular participants you can have living in the house. You could have one of each, for instance.
Wonderful. Is there anything else I should cover in this actual pipeline data graph here, Rob, that stands out?
No, just that obviously the opportunity in Victoria in terms of the amount of people looking to live in these SDA approved properties is far greater than the actual supply. And we'll talk about the issues around supply shortly. But also it may be worth touching on the fact the number of people that are currently living in hospitals and living in nursing homes.
So in Victoria, there are 6,200 participants who are funded for the SDA. Now, if you go back to if you recall what I mentioned in my last slides, there was only 450 dwellings or so that are SDA, of which are only 500 places. So there are, of these 6,200 people who are SDA funded, only 500 are living in an SDA home, which means there are 5,700 people who are not living in an SDA home in Victoria. And they are living in currently a nursing home, aged care facility, or the hospitals, or living with mum and dad. And as you can appreciate, if you are a participant living with an older parents, couples, there's concern with what's going to happen after they pass away when they get old. So the government is aware that that's also an issue there as well. Currently, the Victorian market is 4.5% concentration of SDA participants in the total disability market in the NDIS. And that's the highest number in all of Australia's jurisdictions. The last 2 years, we've seen a lot of concentration of investment from investors around Australia into the Queensland market and the New South Wales market. And the Victorian market has been neglected somewhat. And that's probably due to because the lack of land supply. And Rob, do you want to touch on the land supply there as well for Victoria?
Yeah, with over the last few years, as people will understand, when we had COVID and the government brought in all sorts of government incentives for building new homes in 2020, there was a fair bit of land, but there was an enormous amount of sales done. Now, as of the last 3 months, it is getting very difficult to find new land estate land pretty much anywhere in Melbourne and anywhere in Victoria. And if there is land available to purchase, a lot of it is 12 to 18 months away from being titled. So there's a long wait in that regard. So very little supply, still enormous demand in the community. So that's one problem. Second problem is on the builder side. Because this is a very complicated process that is foreign to what builders traditionally have done in the past, they're struggling to get their head around it. And there's only a few builders that are comfortable with building properties in this sector and are happy to run with it. They've also got the issues based on COVID and supply chain problems and the cost of all the goods building the homes. There's also financial constraints at the minute and difficulties for builders. The beauty of what we've done over the last year is we've screened a number of builders and come up with a few builders and different types of builds, as Min might allude to shortly, that are suitable and appropriate both in Melbourne and Victoria for this sector, where we also know that they're financially stable. And that's a crucial thing over the next couple of years, because there are a number of builders that are unfortunately teetering on the edge of financial stability.
Thank you, Rob. If you're wondering what kind of areas should be of interest for you as an investor for SDA, I'll just cover maybe a few numbers here. So Ballarat has 189 people in SDA dwellings, being group homes and legacy homes. And there will be a total number of 246 people who need new SDA dwellings. When we talk about legacy homes and group homes, they are the older housing products that are out there that we'll see about 30, 40 years old and 6 or 7 people living in the house. They are in the process of being defunded from state level. So the state jurisdictions are aware that the SDA NDIS is here for the long haul, and they're slowly transitioning those participants out of those legacy homes into more of the fit for purpose homes and apartments and villas for SDA funded participants. So Ballarat is up there. Bendigo is next at 184 participants who need a brand new SDA home. Geelong at 331, Hume 163, Latrobe 219, and the list goes on. So as I said to you earlier, 6,000 plus participants need new dwellings for SDA, and only 500 of them are living in an SDA dwelling, which is fit for purpose. So the key words in the NDIS are fit for purpose and choice and control. Participants should have the choice and control of where they want to live and who they want to live with, be it by themselves or the co-tenants, and they must live in a fit for purpose environment. Rob, do you want to mention to our listeners about the concept of participants fighting back in the tribunals where they have been denied funding and go to the tribunals for a fair hearing and getting what they want for accommodation,
Okay.
please?
Yeah, what's happened over the last couple of years, you all are probably aware that the government is concerned about the spiralling costs of the NDIS and this whole sector. So it's only natural that they're looking to ways to cut funding or make savings in the sector while still fulfilling their promises. What they have been doing over the last couple of years is that, for instance, a particular participant in a wheelchair might want to live in a one-bedroom apartment in an inner-city Melbourne area, and that's what they want to get funding for. But when they go to the NDIA, because that particular one-bedroom apartment under the structure of rental payments is around about $120,000 a year that the government has to pay to the investor, what the NDIA have been doing in a lot of cases is saying, no, we won't let you live in a one-bedroom apartment. We want you to go and move in with a couple of other participants and live in a 3-bedroom house in a suburb that's nearby. Now, the reason for doing that is if that particular participant then in the house, we're looking at around about 40 to 50,000 per year that the government has to pay. So they thought that they could make savings in that regard. But where it's heading now, as Min mentioned, choice and control and the well-being of these particular participants is paramount. is that a number of these participants are challenging these findings in the tribunals and court system and saying that they should have the choice and ability to live wherever they like, regardless of the cost. And the courts are basically finding in their favour now that, yes, the government cannot dictate to them that they have to live in a house purely based on cost savings.
However,
So,
however,
yep.
Rob, the burden of proof is on the participant and the families. So if a person's in a wheelchair and and there's two scenarios here, they are self-employed, they have their own business, like a home-based business, like a lawyer or a consultant. They need that secondary bedroom as a home office to operate from. And they can't live in a one-bedroom unit. That's number one. And secondly, they can't live in a group home either, or a home with other people. So under those circumstances, they should win their appeal against the government in a tribunal case to get what they want. A second scenario could be where a person has a partner and children, right? And their funding only allows them to share in a house with 3 other people. Well, how does a parent who's in a wheelchair supposed to have children living with him and his partner living with him in a shared group home? It's impossible. So there have been cases recently where participants are winning against the government and saying, look, I am a parent, I have 2 children who come and live with me once or twice a week, and I can do that in my own 2-bedroom unit where I'm a single occupant. And in those cases, they do win. However, I do emphasize that the onus of proof is on the participant to prove what they should be able to live in that environment. Because at the end of the day, who doesn't want to live in a brand new apartment on the beach, high rise, right? But there are funding limitations with the government, and they are aware of the spiraling costs. So it's to and fro the opportunities here to win, get what they want. Yeah. Rob, next slide. This here is just what I mentioned earlier. So of the 2021 numbers as of December, there were 6,700 dwellings in the SDA, of which 4,300 of them are the older style homes, which will all be defunded and out of commission at some point, So at the moment, there's 2,400 dwellings there, of which the average is 1.9 participants per house. So we're looking at almost 5,000 people living in an SDA home, 5,000 out of 17,000. Okay. So the number there, $31 million every year, based upon based on the 22 billion budget 2 years ago, it should be $700 million allocated to the SDA. With the 40 billion now, we're looking at probably double that, so 1.4 billion per year in SDA allocation of funds. So we are still far behind with regards to funding and expenditure of SDA accommodation rental amounts to investors. But that is the current scenario right there at the moment. Rob, I'll let you take over this place, please.
Okay, this is just the 4 categories that we discussed earlier that a participant is in, which then determines the type of housing and the particular build quality of the home, and also the rental that you can get. Roughly 70% of all the participants in the SDA are in the improved livability category. For all intensive purposes, we wouldn't know that a lot of these people in this category were disabled. They can still get around, walk fine. They might have autism, and there's a number of particular impairments they might have, but they still can operate quite well every day, but they just need carer help, and they're also in the system. These particular homes require the least amount of structural changes versus a traditional investment property. And in terms of build cost, it's obviously at the lower end compared to the other 3 categories. Then we have on the left, robust. Robust is roughly around 10% of the participants' requirements in the system. A robust participant is someone who has behavioural issues. These particular homes have to be built to a higher structural quality. They have to have acoustic reinforcements. They have to be soundproofed. They have to be visually, in terms of colours, soothing, and the walls and everything have to be built to a structural standard similar to a commercial or a group home that can withstand any particular damage going forward. Now, this particular category has got enormous demand currently in Victoria, because what's been happening over the last few years in Melbourne and Australia-wide is that most investors go for the high physical support category, which I'll touch on in a minute, because theoretically it pays the highest amount of rental. However, the category that needs the most houses at the minute is the robust category. We're currently dealing with a SIL provider, a care organisation in Melbourne that has got 50 current robust participants on their waiting list looking for these houses. So it is a very good category to look at building an investment property in. The other thing to be aware, because there's such an imbalance with supply and demand in favour of demand at the minute within Victoria, one of the slight turn-offs an investor has had over the last couple of years is the thinking that, no, we don't want to build an investment property where there potentially could be behavioural issues and damage. But there is a very wide spectrum within this category of participants in robust. There are a number that don't pose any physical danger to anyone within the house, that they might be reformed alcoholics, reformed drug addicts, that the SIL providers are more than happy to send in one particular carer to look after them, knowing that they'll be perfectly safe and there's no issues there. The other extreme is that there are participants that can be a danger in terms of their behavioural issues, but the beauty at the minute is that you can look at the lower level robust participant in terms of putting them into the homes rather than focusing on the higher level ones. Fully accessible are homes that require a little bit more build quality as well. They're for those people in a wheelchair, but they can still get around themselves in their wheelchair within the home and outside. They're still capable of doing their own meals. They need care. So we need all the ramps. There's all sorts of things within the homes that need to be a little bit lower because they're in a wheelchair. So you've got your kitchen benches and all your bathroom accessories that need to be built a little bit lower than a standard investment property. You need to have roll-in access to showers. In the final category, and in this particular build quality, high physical, it is a fair bit extra to build these particular properties because they have to have structural supports in the ceilings and in the walls. So for people, and we'll show a picture shortly, where they have to get out of bed and they're in a wheelchair, they have to buy supports, which obviously need to be load bearing. You also need, in the high physical category, extra stuff put into the house, such as you need battery backup, solar, and there also is currently potentially a need to put in fire sprinklers into these homes as well. So this all costs a little bit extra in that particular category. It is subsidised because you get the higher income, but you have to weigh up at the minute, particularly in Victoria, whether that's the best use of the funds. That's someone in the wheelchair. It looks like we've cut them off there, so I might go on to the next one. This is what I was talking about earlier. That's the supports that obviously we have to be attached to the ceiling. So therefore, you need a much higher grade of build in terms of the structure and the ceilings and the walls. Min, do you want to talk about the particular funding involved?
Yeah. So at the moment, there's a current industry trend towards 2 participant occupants in a house. So 2-3 years ago, you would have seen a lot of 5-bedroom homes, HBSs. And what the SIL providers have come back with in the last year and a half or so is it's hard to have 3 participants in a house if they are wheelchair participant, because there's just not enough space. These high physical support participants in these electrical wheelchairs take up a lot of space. If you can imagine this, having 3 people in large wheelchairs in the living room watching TV, there's just not enough space for that. So unless you have a second living space, SDA providers are reluctant to have 3 participants in a house. So if you look on this map here, we're looking at 2 resident homes. And this is the SDA funding exclusive of the RRC, which is the reasonable rent contribution, consisting of the 25% of the disability pension plus the Commonwealth rent assistance. So that's about $9,800 a year. So if you add $9,800 per year to these numbers, that is the cost. Well, that's the income provided to the investors per participant per house. So in this scenario, let's just choose high physical support with OOA, going down the far right column, going across from 2 residents house, 44,500 plus the 10,000 is about 54,000 times 2. It's about $108,000 a year gross income for the investor for that 3-bedroom house. 3-bedroom house meaning a OOA, on-site overnight assistance, carer, plus the 2 participants. Okay. If you go across to the left, you're looking at the robust category, the improvability, the fully accessible. There are different amounts of funding that comes from the government to the SDA provider, which then gets paid over to the investor. Okay, so the apartments, the villa duplexes, the houses, the group homes, these are all covered and adjusted every single year with the CPI indexation. Rob, that's pretty much covered that section there. Over to you.
Yeah, we just got a couple of examples of build floor plans for these type of homes. Basically, the main differences are, and this is what everyone would want in their home, is that they need to be bigger with more space. Hallways need to be wider, bedrooms need to be bigger, kitchens and living rooms have to have more space for everyone to move around in. Bathrooms, as we touched on. So a lot of these properties will be either 3-bedroom, 3-bath or 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They'll have a walkway area at the front that will be 1,200 millimetres wide versus the average property that might be 900. So just a bigger, more open space property. As we talked about, the kitchen and dining area might have adjustable shelves and everything, and adjustable cookware that's a little bit lower than normal. And the bathrooms, etc., where they can roll into the shower. So a little bit more open plan, a little bit more like a hotel type scenario.
Rob, this one here in front of us is more like a small house for improvability or robust category.
Yep. Just another example of another design, Min, 2 garage. I think this is actually a duplex, correct?
Dual occupancy home for robust or improvability. More so the robust category here.
So again, just an example of you might get two participants on one side and one on the other. So the
and Rob, just to explain, this dual living home design applies more to the robust category of participants. So you might have a robust participant on one side. So let's look at this here. Bedroom 1, bedroom 2 is a carer in bedroom 2.
Up the top. Yep.
And then the participant as a robust participant in bedroom 1. And they can't live with anyone else. They need to be living by themselves because they just can't share. And what you'll find with robust participants is majority of the time, it's going to be 1 participant per house or villa or 2. Never, ever do you see 3. It's very rare, unless they're best friends who get along well together already. So this is a scenario whereby you have one side, one robust participant with a carer, and the other side is a carer plus 2 participants, also robust. Okay, so in this kind of environment, you actually have 2 participants on site who are helping out with the participants. Now, the carers are there 24/7. So in a 24-hour shift, you got 3 shifts of 8 hours each, and 3 and a carer every 8-hour shift. So at least in this scenario here of us, at least 2 carers at any one time, if not 3 or 4. Okay.
Just another design here, Min. Obviously a bigger home.
This is your traditional high physical support wheelchair home. And as you can see there, that the bedrooms are much more larger to cater for the wheelchairs space in the bedroom, and also the bathrooms. The bathrooms are larger, 1, 2, and 3. So bedroom 1, where are we? Bedroom 1. Bed 1 is the carer's office. So as you can see, the bathroom is smaller and the bedroom smaller. So that's the carer's office there at the very end. And bed 2, 3, and 4 will be the high physical support participants. Now, it doesn't mean that this house is only for HPS participants. You might have a mixture of fully accessible and improvability. And to be honest, we always educate our investors and clients that if you have a 4-bedroom HPS, as you can see here, expect to have 1 HPS and then maybe an FA, fully accessible participant, and an IL, improvability. If not 2 ILs and 1 HPS. Very rarely would you see 3 HPS participants under one roof.
This is just obviously another example of a home. What we might do now is, Min, just give people a bit of an understanding of the different rental returns based on different areas, for instance, in Melbourne, that we can look at. If you're looking at an outer suburb estate where there is demand, as we mentioned earlier, there is enormous demand in the Geelong, Armstrong Creek area, significant demand in the outer west around the Wyndham Vale, Tarneit area, the northwest going all the way out to Sunbury, the north, and also the southeast going down to Clyde and Cranbourne. So to give you an idea, you have to have a flat block for these type of properties. You can't be building on a block that has significant fall on it, because again, you're dealing with predominantly people in a wheelchair, so they can't be going up and down hills. So then you're looking at around about a 350 to 400 square metre block required for most of these builds that we've touched on today. So in terms of cost, in terms of land, anywhere from 350 to 500,000 is the rough range in those areas. If you wanted to look at country areas of Victoria, again, a very good option. If land's available where the land purchase price is lower, you might only be at $200,000 to $300,000 looking down at Gippsland or up the north of Victoria. In terms of the build cost, we're anywhere from 400 to north of 500, 600,000, depending on the size and the category. So overall, to build one of these houses in those areas that's going to have demand to be rented, you're probably looking at around about the $800,000 in the Melbourne market. That will likely, based on the formula of what Min talked about in terms of the type of tenants you'll get, you'll be in the range of realistically $90,000 to $100,000 rental return on that. So the gross return is probably about 12 to 13% for 2 tenants. We're not going to suggest 3, as Min touched on, because that is very unlikely going forward. In terms of expenses, think of a normal investment property, very similar. A couple of areas are a little bit more costly in terms of the rental agency fee. Instead of the standard 7 or 8% plus GST that a rental agent will charge, you're looking at 10% plus GST. And the reason for that is that there is a 2% fee plus GST for compliance management in order to keep in the good books of the NDIS and the government department. Give an idea, you might think that's a lot, but most of the providers now have to put on a full-time compliance officer to make sure that everything's followed by the letter of the law and that there's no issues going forward with the participants, because their safety is paramount. So everything has to be touched, the I's and the T's have to be well and truly dotted and crossed in this sector. The only other cost that probably is a little bit higher depending on the category is the insurance. If you are looking at robust tenants, instead of paying $1,000 per year for insurance, you're looking at 3 to 4. But overall, your net rental return for one of these properties will be about $80,000 a year. So roughly 10% return in those particular areas. Higher in the country. What we didn't touch on, Min, was the locational factor. Depending on the particular area of Melbourne or Victoria, the rental return that the government pays is slightly higher or lower. So for instance, in Melbourne, they'll pay a little bit more because they recognise that the land costs and the cost of properties in Melbourne is more expensive than out of Melbourne and regional areas. However, there are certain regional areas in Victoria where the government's encouraging these projects to be built because there's a need. So therefore, they'll incentivise that by providing a slightly higher rental guarantee over the 20-year period.
Yeah, and that amount's probably 3 to 5% higher than the other metro areas in Melbourne. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Min. So I'm just thinking, is there anything else we should cover?
I do want to cover one thing. You mentioned earlier about two participants per house there. Look, there are occasions where there is more than 2 participants. If you build a 4-bedroom robust house, the expectation is you'll have 1 carer plus 2 participants robust at most, right? But in the event that you do not actually have robust participants and there's an application by 3 improved livability participants, then that would certainly be of interest from the provider and also the landlord. And I'll give you an example. Autism, cerebral palsy, blindness, okay, multiple sclerosis, MS. Those are very low needs. So we have high needs and low needs. Low needs disabilities, be mental or physical, and they will get along very well together, 2 or 3 of them. So 3 IL participants living in the house with a carer would be absolutely fine if it was a robust house or an improved ability house. Now, obviously, yes, the robust house will probably have 2 robust only at a time. But look, even if, and Rob and I have covered this many times in the past, a robust home has 3 types of tenants. Robust tenants, 2, improved ability, 3, and a regular mum and dad home, mum and dad and 2 kids. So investors often ask, well, what if I build this house in this area, how do I know I'll definitely get rent or tenants? Rob, do you want to explain the difference between a normal house and a IL or robust home from a naked eye perspective, Rob?
There really isn't a lot of difference. There's obviously the ramps at the front and the back rather than steps.
Actually, no, Rob. With robust homes, there are no ramps.
Yeah, well, there you go. There's not really a lot of difference, full stop. It's mainly stuff you can't see, as we discussed earlier. So reinforced walls, soundproofing, improvements in lighting and colour in the home. But that is stuff that a normal property is actually seen as an advantage.
Yeah.
In terms of soundproofing, insulation, etc.
So door frames are 10 centimeters wider. The hallway is 10 centimeters wider as a minimum. So if you walk into a robust or improved ability home, you cannot tell the difference at all from a normal house to an SDA house. Not at all.
Yeah, so it can easily be rented, worst case scenario, to a normal family rather than an SDA approved family.
Exactly. So that's the robust home there. For a high physical support home, the categories of participants are improved ability or fully accessible or high physical support. So they're the 3 categories there.
And high physical does need the ramps. So there is a little bit more visually different. It needs the supports in the ceilings. As we mentioned, it needs to be able to roll in a wheelchair in the shower and the toilet area. So there is a bit of difference in that category. And Min touched on the width of the hallways and the bedrooms. They need to be wider again, 1,200 millimetres minimum in a high physical home in order for someone in a large wheelchair to be able to turn and get around.
So as you can see on this slide here in front of you, this is a very spacious high physical support house. So the garage is 2.5 times a normal single garage. So it's slightly wider than a double garage. You have concrete bitumen around the whole sides of the house to allow the participants to roll around and enjoy their own space in their own little patio area or their backyard. And they really want space and privacy and storage space as well. Space for themselves to spend time by themselves, storage to put their secondary wheelchairs, and then just space to move around in the house. And this is assuming a 4-bed, 4-bath house, obviously. So second living space, sensory gardens, maybe even a hydrotherapy pool, fire sprinklers. These are little changes that future-proof a house. And if you're going to invest in SDA, don't be a Scrooge and cut down costs and have minimal, options. There are so many things you can add to a house to future-proof the house for the participants long term, because you want to have the participants living there for the long term because they want to be there forever. That's for their forever home. And by doing those little changes or variations in the build design, in a good location, in a nice block of land, it actually does help their long-term needs as well. Yeah. So that's all I can say really regarding the participants' needs. Always focus on their needs first. And if you make them happy, you'll have a very happy tenant long-term. And then you as an investor and landlord will enjoy the returns and yields in the next 15, 20 years as an investor.
Okay, I mean, maybe we should touch on briefly before we finish just some of the questions that potential investors have and the roadblocks that they might have in terms of how do we guarantee tenants, how do we know the government's going to continue to pay the rental, just to give people peace of mind as to what the issues that prop up are. Do you want to start that, or do you want me to talk about that?
You can bring them up and I'll help you answer them, if not Michael as well. Yeah, please.
Yeah, obviously the first question we generally get from investors is, well, what sort of guarantee is there that you'll continue to get the rental income that you discussed for 20 years? The first thing is the government is guaranteeing they will pay the rental for 20 years. They're not guaranteeing the tenant. So you still have to acquire the tenant. Once you've got the tenant, the government then will guarantee the payment until 2039. So technically it's about 18 years for now. Now, this particular policy is supported by all sides of parliamentary persuasion, Labor, Liberal, Greens, etc. They're fully committed to continue that for the full length of the timeframe going forward. And we believe that the likelihood is that the expenditure in this sector will actually increase, not decrease. It's probably not going to be a very smart or popular decision for the government to look at cutting funding to the disabled sector in Australia. So it would be one of the last sectors you'd think that the government would cut back funding with. Secondly, and this is the one that most people focus on because it is a little bit more unusual than getting normal tenants, is, okay, how do we know we're going to be able to get tenants in the area? That's where our services really come to the fore in a number of ways. One, Min touched on all the statistics earlier. He constantly gets updated statistics as to where all the supply and the demand is across all suburbs in Australia, where the trends are of where these particular houses are required. We then look at those trends. We are currently dealing with a number of care organisations that have potential tenants going forward, looking at partnerships with them, where we'll go to that organisation and say, okay, where do you need houses? Where have your particular customers wanting to have an SDA home? They might say, okay, we've got a number in the southeast of Melbourne looking for a house. So we will then go to investors and also actively look for land in those particular areas, put the packages together for the investor and say to the investor, we've got a cell provider that is prepared to provide what's called a comfort letter, where they will do all endeavours to provide tenants into that particular house, either upfront or once it's built. And at the minute, as we've discussed, the demand in all areas of Melbourne is far outstripping supply. So we are very comfortable in the areas that we're suggesting investors look at, that they will, in fact, get tenants pretty quickly once the build finishes. Yeah.
It's unfortunate that we can't do a real seminar with all these attendees today, because today's seminar in Michael's office at the Hopkins Group, we actually had a nice big pack of research reports and data, which actually shows the locations, the demand areas, the SIL funding in all the areas. I think if there's a seminar coming up in Collins Street at Michael's office, it'll be very opportune for people to come along to talk to us there in a boardroom environment, because we can actually show you more data in the books and so forth. But yeah, look, the data's there, and it's hard for consumers to actually look for the data when there's so much information everywhere. The NDIS website, ndis.gov.au, has data being released every quarter. Talking to SIL providers, looking at research reports, it's all out there. It's hard to find, but if you come to us and ask us for guidance, we'll actually show you. We'll email the information very easily. But that's one thing. Knowing the data is one thing. Actually having access to land is the hard part. Finding land, finding a builder to match with the data, it's a big juggling act, Rob, as you can appreciate, and it's often hard to do quickly enough to.
Yep.
The communities.
And do you want to touch on briefly, just to finish, the different types of builds?
One of our guest speakers today, David Loudon from Elton Homes, was in there talking about the different types of builds, being apartments, villas, and whatnot. You mean?
Yeah, just the different types of builds. So to give everyone an idea, a traditional build in this sector does take a little bit longer than a standard investment property to build. You're talking 9 months to build the property, but then you're talking 3 to 4 months in preparation up to that point. So from the point that you may start to talk to us about an investment in this sector, you have to look at funding, which is a little bit more complicated, but can be done, and it all comes in pretty much at purchase price. You're talking 12 to 15 months from go to woe to build one of these properties. But we are talking to builders that are using newer technology, and Min can touch on that, where the properties can be built significantly quicker.
So what we mean by that is 15 months, 15 to 17 months is the time frame to build a house in Australia for SDA, NDIS. The other option is to do manufactured housing, where they build it in an actual factory. So we had a speaker today from Elton Homes in the boardroom today at the seminar, and he explained that they actually build the house in actually under 17 days, fully built, turnkey, on site, and tenant ready within under 30 days, pretty much. And that's the key here. Speed to market is the key for investors, because participants cannot wait a year and a half for a house. They're looking to move now. And we are continually looking for opportunities in Tasmania right now, Adelaide, and more so Victoria, being Metro Melbourne, and also regional Victoria, for opportunities to put such products like this, where you can manufacture houses very quickly in the factory and have it on site in under 30 days. That's the key thing there. Speed to market, particularly with the concern that investors have in the marketplace with builders, Rob. Builders being, struggling with their capacity to deliver product at the moment in the marketplace.
Yeah, the quicker you get the build organised, the less time that you're actually taking risks that something may happen to the builder during the build.
Mm.
All right, great. I think we've covered everything. So for anyone who's interested, please contact Michael and his team at John Hopkins Group to talk about the opportunity and how it may be applicable to your financial situation and how it might help. There's other strategies we haven't really touched on that may be appropriate here as well. Like this particular investment's land tax exempt. It may help with you being able to increase your serviceability on your existing investment properties and free up more ability to lend. There's various things that may apply to different people to make this a very attractive and appropriate investment for you going forward.
Rob, there's one question from someone in the chat box there. He asked, how much deposit do we need and who would give finance? Normal banks or not? So the answer is no, the banks do not get involved with this. Maybe Westpac is the only bank I know of. He came out recently with a 50% LVR, but most of the banks are saying no to SDA lending because the challenges of this market. Mortgage Easy, Mortgage Mart, Granite Home Loans, they would be, and also Latrobe, they would be non-bank lenders who actually do NDIS lending for investors. The average deposit you need is about 25 to 30% deposit of the purchase price. So if you're looking at a $900,000, let me rephrase it. Minimum is 20%. So if you're looking at a $800,000 house somewhere in Australia, 20% is going to be $160,000, 160, and then you have stamp duty, provider fees, potentially fire sprinklers, furniture package. So 30% is a nice number to cover also valuation shortfall, because you cannot assume that there'll be a perfect valuation, there'll be zero shortfall. So even with a 40, 50 grand shortfall, that puts you at $220,000, $230,000. So my answer to you, Prince, is about 200,000, give or take 20, 30 grand is the answer with regards to SDA, the fund deposits for SDA purchases. I hope that answers the question there.
It does.
Any other questions? Yep.
Yes, I answered quite a few questions on the Q&A in the chat as we went along. But Rob, Min, really appreciate your time. Whilst we're looking at this as an investment for clients, both on a capital growth perspective and an income or yield perspective, you can't take away that this is needed in our society. This is a great social housing opportunity. There's no doubt that we do want to, as a society, provide a housing solution, and the old group homes and nursing homes of the past just aren't going to work. And I can tell you, as you've probably met many a client, that parents are looking to help their kids out and they're scared about the future that applies to them when they're not going to be here to help look after them. So we can all be proud this is a great social housing opportunity, but the overlaying investment side of things, the potential for future capital growth by buying in the right location and the income yield makes it attractive. We're going to be sending out a survey after this. We'll also attach a form that you can book straight into our diaries to chat about your personal situation and if this strategy or another strategy is appropriate for you. We'll also send through a link for the full video presentation, so feel free to or feel pleased to pass it on to friends or family to have a look at as well. We look forward to seeing you in the office, and thank you again for your attendance.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a good night. Bye.